Welcome back to my channel where we provide an alternative viewpoint. Today's topic is future scenario for world affairs, effectively or more concern about America, Europe, Russia, and South, as they call it. And this is basically scenario number 2. If you want to listen more, then please watch this video, and hopefully I can talk some sense, and hopefully you agree with me. Welcome back. My last video, I talked about the military aspect of the future as how I see it. And I forgot actually to say something. Yeah, the saying goes, Rome wasn't built in one day. It takes time for things to develop. We are now 11 months into SMO. If you look at the contact line, not much is happening. It's still winter. Well, technically, it's still winter. There was no big Russian offense in the winter. There will probably also not be one in spring, because as everybody tells us, it's wet and the ice will melt and the snow will melt and will become muddy and all this other stuff. And well, that's maybe also one of the biggest reasons why there was no big military action on or development on the contact line. I'm not a big supporter of that the Ukrainian army has been decimated. Neither am I a big supporter of this called meat grinder. Yes, people died. Make no mistake, people died. But I don't believe there's 100,000 Ukrainians killed in action, neither 200,000 killed in action, neither 400,000 injured. Because then there would have been nothing left. Because as we all understand, we are told the Ukrainian army is 700,000 men strong. And we know that a huge part of that is logistics. And if you look at the daily reports of the Russian defense minister, then they're always killing every day some more soldiers and destroy some more APCs and tanks and aircrafts and artillery pieces and so forth and so forth. Well, if the Ukrainian army has been destroyed, then how can the Russians still destroy anything? And if the Ukrainians have pumped in so much manpower into Bakhmut and Soledar, then they are idiots. And I don't believe that anybody is that big an idiot, because at the end of the day, what are we told? The Russians and the Ukrainians are brothers. So surely the Russians can't be that more cleverer in terms of military aspects than the Ukrainians are, because they are the same type of people, with the same type of culture and way of thinking. So unfortunately, this whole military operation is going to go on for some time. Not for months, not for 2 months, not for 5 months. I believe it's going to go on for years. The Russians will at the end of the day be forced to take over the whole of Ukraine, and then the contact line will just shift to the borders of Ukraine. And there will be some internal guerrilla warfare, and the NATO and the West might overstep their boundaries, and Russia will say, but I've lost our patience, I've shown enough, and that's it, and take a necessary action, warning shots, so. But that's not what like I said, that is not something that will happen overnight. And that brings me actually to the main topic of today. And here I'm talking about the financial situation, the world finance system. And the world finance system is standing on the brink of collapse. And I will just explain to you just now why it is like that and why I believe it is like that. The Russians, well, the Americans had two tools that they, well, three actually. The fact that the dollar was a world currency, reserve currency, that was important. That gave Americans a huge benefit, financial benefit, where the world basically subsidized the American lifestyle and American printing of money without the necessary consequences. And then we had the development of the euro, and the euro also became a reserve currency, and they also printed money. And then what the Americans and the Europeans have done now with the SMO is, finally, they didn't do it against Venezuela, they did it against Venezuela and Iran and so on, but those are small countries that cannot stand up to themselves. But in this case, they have Russia, and Russia can stand up for itself, and it has the support of the Chinese. Now, the Chinese support the Russians in principle, but they also have their own problems, not in terms of only the economy, but on the dependence on the West, because they are a manufacturing powerhouse and export most of their goods towards America and Europe. So they need the trade of these two countries, and that makes them vulnerable and cannot support Russia as much as they want to do it. And that's why they're also so cautious when it comes to Taiwan and now the military development in Japan as well. So they are bound by their economic ties with the West. And that creates a huge problem. Now Russia and China, mostly China as well, they have now developed an alternative financial system because America used their dollar, so they couldn't trade in dollar. They cut them off from SWIFT, so they cannot use international trade payments due to SWIFT, and therefore they had to develop their own alternative to SWIFT. The credit cards are stopped, and therefore they had to develop their own type of credit, internal credit cards in China and in Russia. And then a lot of the reserves of the Russian government was frozen. And apart from the reserves that were frozen, which I understand is about $300 billion, a lot of the oligarchs' property and wealth has also been frozen in the Western world. Now, forget about democracy, human rights, property rights. Forget about all the goodies that the West is trying to tell us of their values. They have no values. They have broken every single value that they try to honor and they try to enforce on us. They have broken themselves. They have no freedom of speech by banning Russian outlets. They have confiscated property, so there is no property rights anymore. They have violated sports, culture. Basically, they have become racists in terms of their attitude toward Russia. They have exposed their double standards in terms of what the Russians do in Ukraine and what the West has done in Iraq and Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, Yemen, which is still ongoing. So they have broken, don't be bullshitted by any of these nice words. There is such a thing as democracy and human rights in the Western world. They have become dictatorial, authoritarian towards their people. I mean, the biggest example would be Canada. Canada, which is supposed to be the friendly people, the tolerant people, and what did they do with the truckers and the COVID? Well, that should show you a lot. And when COVID came, and COVID is an engineered, well, forget about the illness. I'm not talking about the illness, but what went around, the lockdowns, the total authoritarian behavior of the governments. Those were the bad things that happened in that period. It destroyed industries. It destroyed livelihoods of people. It changed the fabric of industry. It showed the weakness of supply lines. It destroyed globalization. It destroyed a hell of a lot of things. But one of the most important things that it did is it created money. between $6 and $7 trillion was printed in America out of thin air to support the economy and handle COVID. I'm not sure what the ECB has printed, but it should be more or less, say, the half of that. They were not that greedy or so. But they are printing now in order to prop up the energy prices and the industry. And what happened is that these things caused the inflation, the initial inflation. That's why we have inflation in America and in Europe. And that is why prices are rising. And don't be bullshitted to say that this is Putin and his military operation. It's not. It started off in 2021, and it has all to do with the COVID lockdowns. And if you have really read a lot of articles and so on, you will find that rich people have become richer during the COVID period lockdowns, and the middle class is busy or declining, and the people are getting poorer. But the rich people all got richer by a huge percentages. That is common knowledge. You can read it in all the financial systems, papers. So inflation started with the COVID lockdowns and supporting the economy. And it has only been exacerbated, if that's a correct word, made worse by the Russian SMO and the sanctions that were implemented. Now again, like I said, the world is a complex system of many, many variables. They are all interlinked and interdependent, and it's impossible basically to predict anything. It's like the weather. You have huge models that predict the weather, but there are so many variables that even supercomputers cannot really work it out precisely. Yes, they have a tendency, what your temperature might be tomorrow and when it will rain and so on. But how many times have weather predictions come wrong, which you have noticed? Rain tomorrow. No rain tomorrow. See, it's very difficult to do that. Now the economic world, economic system is just like that. Everything is interlinked. Money is interlinked. Financial systems are interlinked. Share prices, profit margins, supply lines, manufacturing, labor, everything. Trade agreements, taxes, and so on. So, throughout the years, the Americans have abused the system of sanctions. You can look at Venezuela. Britain doesn't want to return the 100 tons of gold to Venezuela. They have sanctioned Cuba for how long? Venezuela, America confiscated all their petrol stations or infrastructure in England, but they couldn't do much about it. They confiscated Afghanistan's money. They stole Libya's gold. They stole Iraqi gold. And they don't want to give it back. But all these countries are small. But Russia and China is not. And now China and Russia has now decided to build up an alternative system, financial system. Starting to use local currencies, get away from the dollar. Saudi Arabia and some of the other Middle Eastern countries that said they will sell their oil now, not in dollars anymore. So there goes the petrodollar and the strength of the dollar. So the world is changing, but it takes time. Nothing happens till tomorrow. Like I said, Rome is not built in one day. So these things will take time, 2, 3, 4, 5 years minimum, before we see an alternative. But there's a danger to this whole thing. And that is the reason why I actually talked about scenario 2. After the Second World War, we had the Bretton Woods system, where the dollar was considered as a world reserve currency, and it was tied to gold. So you could swap the dollar over to gold in exchange for that. But in 1972, America had so much debt, and when France wanted to exchange the dollar for gold, America said no, and it went off the gold standard. So therefore, the dollar in 1972 became a pure fiat currency, which means there's nothing that backs the dollar. It's just a piece of paper and a promise to pay you something. I don't know what they're going to pay, but they are promising that you can use it to buy something. So it's all about trust. Now, because the dollar was so integrated into the world economy and it still had the petrodollar's position, which was created just after that, the dollar was still in big demand, and it is the world currency, world reserve currency today. And a lot of countries have it still. But just remember, it is a fiat currency. It works on trust. Do the people still trust the dollar? Do the people still trust the American economy? Do they still think that the dollar has value? And that is the big question. And if what happened after the SMO, usually in a crisis is, which I don't understand, is even the American economy is stuffed. Make no mistake. America has inflation, has a recession. They just don't want to recognize it because they have been fudging the factors, the numbers, year in and year out. If you want to listen to something about it, go listen to Gerald Celente and the Trends Journal. I love that man. He's a character. But if you listen to him and the numbers, he shows you the numbers that are the real numbers, and then what is the bullshit numbers that is produced in the newspaper, which is false pictures. But most of the investors, financial people in the world still believe in the dollar, and it's still what they read. And they still support that. So when the Ukrainian SMO started, what did the world do? They ran to the dollar. Yes, the statement was what was the pound lost value against the dollar, or the pound tanked, the European tanked. No. If you look at our South African money, the exchange rate between us and the British pound stayed the same. The exchange rate between us and the European Union euro stayed the same. But our exchange rate towards the dollar, that increased, which means the value of the dollar increased. It wasn't the euro that decreased, the value of the euro that decreased. No, it was the dollar that increased in value. Why? Because as soon as there's a crisis, everybody will sheep runs back to the dollar and believes that the dollar will be protected and the American economy is strong, which is a fallacy. Make no mistake about that. America has now a big problem, I saw it today, that they have, Janet Yellen now says that the American Senate or government has to approve a budget of increasing their debt ceiling level. And they have to do it by June this year. And the debt level they have to approve is more than $31.5 trillion, which is like 135% of the fudged American GDP. It's not the true GDP, but that's the fudged one. American economy is not that big, not if you look at the real numbers, like other countries use to determine the GDP. But that's beside the point. So Janet Yellen is saying is they have to cut back now and pay certain, the money that they have to pay essential services in the government and don't pay the other people which are not essential. That means, naturally, if you work for the government, a contract, and you repair something, you're not going to get paid because you're a small guy. The government don't think you are important. But they will support and pay the pension funds and the wages of the employees. But you as a contractor, will not get paid. Happens in South Africa as well. So the American economy is stuffed and the European economy is suffering as well. But I'm coming back to the point again. It's a fiat country, currency. Trust is the only thing that gives value to the dollar and the euro. And I've mentioned what has happened before, if you listen carefully. With the start of SMO, the Western countries and America froze the assets of the Russian Reserve Bank and from the Russian oligarchs. They froze it. So they stole it. The Russians now say, you stole the money. You stole. Now, firstly, Does that sound that you have trust in the dollar and the euro? If the dollar, those countries can steal your money, like they've done in Venezuela, and Iran, and Syria, and Afghanistan, and Iraq. Those guys couldn't do anything, but these guys can. So do you think I still want to invest in a dollar and think as a dollar as a reserve currency, as a store of wealth to protect my wealth? No. But it went on for 11 months. But even that has now changed. I think it was in December. I'm always getting confused with date. November or December. There was this big spending bill approved by the American Senate. It was also the extra funds for Ukraine. It encompassed the support for the economy and green energy in America. That's what the Germans and the French are complaining about, because that's unfair trade practices, and they're supporting and subsidizing the economy, and so forth and so forth. In that bill attached was a small bill that says that they can now confiscate Russian oligarchs' assets and money, and they can spend it to support Ukraine. And Latvia has already also approved legislation that they can steal the Russian money. And the European Council Parliament has now found ways. They're going to take the Russian money, then they're going to lend it to Ukraine, knowing Ukraine will never pay back that money. And once it has been unfrozen, then it is Russia's responsibility to get their money back from Ukraine, which Ukraine has borrowed it from the Russian funds. Which effectively means they have stolen. They're going to steal the European Parliament or whatever body that is. They're going to steal the Russian Reserve Bank money. Not freeze it anymore. They're going to steal it. They're going to take it. Now, this has some seriously implications. Russia is not Iraq, Libya, Venezuela. How do you think China will react? China looks at the Americans who talk the talk, but their actions are different, with Taiwan and Japan. And the Chinese have more than $1 trillion worth of dollar bonds. What do you think they're going to do? What do you think that China will do with all their dollars if the Americans can steal their dollar? And if America constantly tells China they are their biggest threat, they want to start a second front or conflict in the East, consolidate all the other Eastern countries against China, be aggressive against China. How do you think China will react? And what is the underlying principle? Trust in the dollar. But the dollar is a fiat currency, and it's built on trust. It needs the trust. So if it loses the trust, then there will be no more dollar. And I can't remember now who said it. Some guy said, they asked a rich man who went bankrupt, they said, how do you get bankrupt? He said, very slowly and then very suddenly. So it's like a slowly avalanche and then suddenly you would fall off the cliff. And this is going to happen now with the financial system. As soon as they take that Russian money, and that's it. No more trust in American dollar and euros and British pound. No more fiat money. The crash of the financial system. Because at the end of the day, it's not about China or Russia. Those are governments. They provide the framework, the system under which it works. It's the financial systems, the banks, the insurance companies, the pension funds, they will see that it's their money that's invested. And if they lose trust in the fiat currency of the dollar and the euro, they have to protect those value and those assets for their people, and they will withdraw it. And then we will have a financial collapse. And this is a scenario which I believe is more probable than a military Third World War. And I actually discussed it in the previous video on, I believe what it was actually the intention of the people that be to destroy the financial system and put a reset on it. But unfortunately, reset will not work in the favor of the Western nations. But it will affect the whole world. Just remember the stock exchange collapses. The big depression of 2029. 1986. I can't even remember even 2000. I can't even 2008. 2001, 2008. I can't even remember all the names, all the dates. But everybody believed until it was too late. Everybody's still flocking to the dollar because you see other ones are doing it. Until the first, the tulip story, in Netherlands. Tulip was going on along as long as everybody believed it. But when one guy started to doubt, suddenly it was an avalanche and everybody started to doubt. That was the end. And this is what we're seeing today. How long? Like I said, Rome wasn't built in one day. It will take maybe a year still. Depends on when they will confiscate that. When somebody, one of these financial guys gets scared. And then it might happen very soon. And then on the other hand, you have to ask yourself, is the South, Russia and China and all the other guys ready for this crash? Have they protected themselves against that? If it takes 2 or 3 or 4 years, I would say yes. Then it will only be the West that really gets punished. Severely. But the rest of the world will feel the pain, but won't collapse. But if you look at all these symptoms, they're not really talked about. But all these small things show you a tendency. And the direction that it shows you is not good. So in any case, watch out when they take the Russian money. Then we will see some effect. That's my story for today. I hope you understood what I tried to say. I don't say I'm right. Predicting the future is difficult. But I don't see anything good coming out of this. So please tell your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Press the like buttons. Like I said, I would like very much to have debates, but for that I need subscribers, at least 1,000. And if we can have some debates, then that would be nice and fun. So until next time, cheers.